All right, 3, 2, 1. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a returning guest. His name is John Brisson. He runs the We've Read the Documents YouTube channel. I highly recommend people go check that out. He's actually doing the real legwork, the real research into a variety of different subjects. But I'm having him back on tonight to talk about a subject we talked about on March 8th, 2019, which is the finders. And for people who aren't aware, there was a recent FBI drop of a significant number of files, and I have read through them. John has read through them, and I think it was an additional confirmation of this kind of strange group. And what happened was the original 1987 arrest that happened in Tallahassee, Florida. But there's just so much information. It was a significant drop of information. Much of it kind of overlapped each other, but still I found it to be interesting. So John's going to talk more about that. John, are you there?
Yes, I am, William. Thank you for having me back on. Huge fan of the show.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Well, I'm a fan of yours, so I'm glad that you're agreed to this interview. For people who don't know about your background, can you talk a little bit about yourself again, even though you did it back in March, but just talk about yourself, talk about We've Read the Documents, and then talk about this new Finders drop, please.
Yeah, my name's John Brisson. I'm an investigative researcher and reporter. I've been running the We've Read the Documents channel on YouTube for about a year now. You probably have heard me both on William's show and Ed Opperman's show too as well, discussing many topics. I research a lot about what they call the quote-unquote satanic panic or witch hunt narrative of how it was neither one of those, and how ritual abuse was occurring even from the highest levels of the government, if we're talking about Franklin or McMartin or West Point. And going through the documents, just reading books, reading newspaper excerpts from the time, and just trying to investigate what's really going on in these cases where many people say that it does not happen, and tries to cast shade. When you and I both, William, know with the West Memphis Free, with Innocence Project trying to say that, nothing happened there.
Right.
They try to lump that in with the witch hunt narrative. The same with the Finders too, to some degree, and with McMartin Preschool, that nothing was occurring during the 80s.
The witch hunt was frequently and almost always brought up in regards to the West Memphis Three.
Yes, and that seems to be a trigger word that they've been able to use to downplay anything since the 1980s.
Yeah, good point. So, sorry to interrupt, but can you talk a little bit about how you came across the Finders and what you think, kind of preliminary overview of these new FBI documents that dropped?
Yes, I started researching the Finders about 3 years ago on my own. When I was researching the Franklin scandal, I came across Dick Bryant's book, The Franklin Scandal, where he has his first chapters on the Finders and about him reading Ramon J. Martinez's United States Customs report. When I think it was early in the 2000s when he had come across that. And I heard of the Finders off and on. I listened to Alex Jones many, many years ago, and people bring it up on message boards like Godlike Productions. But I never really, really looked into it outside of the basic knowledge of what was in the Tallahassee Police Department documents and what was in the U.S. Customs Department documents. So around the time I started researching James Tower in the Glendale case, and I found out that there was a connection through an investigator named Henry Clements that said that Finders had connected to both Glendale, where James Tower was a convicted headmaster pedophile of the school who served more than a decade in prison. And there was a connection between the two cases, and I was just blown away. I was like, well, this is way more than I'd ever come across on the Finders. Most people just know of what is told in the Customs report or what's told in the Tallahassee Police Department documents. So I said, you know what, I'm really going to start doing the lead work on this. I'm going to start calling people. I'm going to start setting up interviews. I'm going to start reading, finding everything I can on it. And that's what I've had to do since then. It was very, very surprised that we're going to talk about why when the FBI Vault released these Finder documents. Now, from what I could see based off of information that's in the document itself, it does appear that it's a timed release, kind of like a timed declassification that happens every, at certain amount of years. Something is classified and then later has become released when it's unclassified. And I think that's what happened in this case. But yeah, Finders is my main case. I'm still actively researching and writing a book on it right now. And still reaching out to people and trying to get interviews.
Yeah, and it's really been almost about 25 years, so maybe the timing was the 25-year thing, because most of those documents, if I recollect, kind of cut off 1993, 94. Does that sound right?
For the newest documents, yes, but the original documents can go far as like Tallahassee Police Department, which I had, goes far back as 1987.
And what was different and did not overlap with the earlier documents that you had in your possession?
The earlier documents I mentioned, they were on MuckRock. You could find the Tallahassee Police Department documents and other journalists, including I think George actually from cavdef.org, who you've had on the show and Ed's had on the show. He's put it up there on MuckRock, and also the original FBI release, which we actually got more documents this time than we did last time, was through one Vice reporter, Ali Conti. There's about 6 PDFs up there right now on MuckRock. If you search the finders, it'll come up with her Freedom of Information request. But there was actually some stuff in here, William, that I ever thought I would never see. For one, the declassified Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department document, which I never thought I would ever see the light of day. Now, granted, it is redacted to hell, but it did bring to light so many interesting things that I did not know previously beforehand, and we get an account both of Sergeant John Stitcher and Detective Jim Bradley, who worked for the Metropolitan Police Department, and what they were thinking about the finders going on at that time. So that was actually classified secret, and that was classified secret allegedly by both the Foreign Counterintelligence Agency within the FBI and the CIA, which a lot of people don't realize that the FBI actually has an office, the Foreign Counterintelligence Agency office within the FBI that operates on foreign soil, and the CIA can also operate on domestic soil. We've been told to think that the CIA can only operate on foreign soil and the FBI can only operate on domestic soil. Well, that's not true. But yes, they were who got the Metropolitan Police Department document labeled secret, and that was known. But it wasn't really until we saw the document of itself, and it does say secret on there. It says secret, and it's crossed out. That is true. That it was labeled secret by those intelligence agencies.
Interesting. So you got some additional information that is farther away from the state investigation back in Florida, and I mean, what was new that was in those documents that came out of D.C.?
It confirmed it would confirm this old document that I got a hold of about a year ago called the Finder's Chronology that was written by the Metropolitan Police Department. In that the document that I hold, there's parts that are redacted, and in this document it's redacted. However, there is a part mentioned where it talks about some parts of this document that I have, but not all of it, William. And it talks about how so I'm able to verify that this is the real thing because part of it is unredacted in the new FBI release.
Interesting.
So the parts that I knew previously that I had not disclosed was that so the finders had a U.S. passport showing travel by subject to North Korea, North Vietnam, and Soviet Union from 1956 through 1975, which was turned over to State Department security for investigation, but investigators were advised that travel was quote-unquote legitimate and to terminate further investigation. So that was previously not known beforehand. Well, I knew it, but it was previously not known out there. Also, an investigation proceeded. CIA made one contact and admitted to owning the finders organization as a front for a domestic computer training operation, but that had quote-unquote gone bad. CIA defers all further contacts to FCIA, the Foreign Counterintelligence Agency. The FCIA is a distinct and autonomous organization within the FBI. FCIA contacts Metropolitan Police Department Intelligence and advised that all reports regarding the finders are to be classified at the secret level. FCI also advised that no information will be turned over to the FBI for investigation, and that WFAO would be not advised of CIA or FCI involvement. As far as it is known, no details of CIA or FCI involvement ever became public.
Right. So they're saying in those documents that the finders is not a CIA front, correct?
No, that it is. And
it is a CIA front.
It is,
Okay.
yes. And they were working with Future Enterprises to train CIA officials, computers, because the finders were using technology, very advanced technology as far back as in the 1980s, early 1970s, or late 1970s, should I say. So, yes, that they were. And it pretty much confirms. The new FBI documents confirm, William, that at the bare minimum, the finders were definitely working within the CIA, and the CIA wanted to cover it up. At the grand maximum, which I believe to be true, is that they were Marion Petty was an operative. People around him in his inner circle were operatives as well, and they were working at the behest of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Wow, that's incredible. So that's because in my notes I said that there were two CIA, and what I found is they worked for the agency in the 60s, and Future Enterprise is one of their corporate fronts. There were many corporate fronts in the more recent documents, but so they were confirmed in 1987 to still be with the CIA. Is that correct?
Up until 1993, yeah, they were running. They were involved in Future Enterprises.
Wow.
Through training, yes. And they were still investigating them even afterwards. I ran across an interview where the State Department was still keeping tabs on the finders past the the 1993 reopening of the investigation that was closed again. So they were investigating them for a long period of time, even after. So
that's incredible. And some of these documents, these CCs and people involved are very top officials at the FBI, right? Wasn't one? Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about if you recollect those names and who those people were?
The biggest one that we found out was that there was a memo directly to the head of the FBI at that time. In 1993, who was that? I gotta look that up. But there was a memo.
There's a note to the FBI director, right? Yeah.
Yes. The FBI director. I gotta look it up during the 1990s.
But there's also like a deputy assistant attorney.
Louis Freeh.
So Freeh knew. I didn't know Freeh was in.
Yes. Freeh knew according to this, yes.
Wow.
Or at least his office either send the Washington field office documentation. He had to have known. So, yes.
Wow,
and also
incredible. You're
talking about George Bergasser, who worked for the Department of Justice, who was later found in mysterious circumstances out in a boat similar to Colby, in underturned water.
Really? So but he ended up getting suicided, possibly?
Yeah, but that was recently, actually, in the past couple of years.
I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was way after the case.
And Louis Freeh was involved in the whole Sandusky affair at Penn State, right? So
yes,
he had an interesting arch. Yeah, but he only found one criminal. I think one criminal who was involved in that whole affair at Penn State, and that was.
Oh, we know how it is. Right. Lawrence E. King goes down for the Franklin scandal on embezzlement charges.
Right. Yeah, that's incredible. So, I mean, there's other things in here. So, it's a very interesting because there were also some stories about purchasing and trading children, impregnating females, some pretty dark material. Can you talk about some of the contents, those darker contents in this drop?
Yes. One last thing that I do want to mention, though, in the MPD, it talks about the finders had contacts since 1971. Dealing with CIA involvement with at least one of the members of the finder, passing information overseas concerning activities of the CIA. So they had been investigating, the FBI had been investigating the finders since the 1970s, and the CIA had been investigating the finders, at least keeping tabs that we know of. Now, I'm pretty sure it's the very beginning, but they at least admitted these new documents in the late 1960s. Gotcha.
And I mean, we can get to this, but there was also a very important article that you covered in your the YouTube site. We've read the documents where you're talking about this other article, and we can talk about that later. But there's some interesting information about Petty in that as well, true. Right? Wasn't that the Washington Metro? Is that right?
Yeah, it was the Washington City paper.
Washington City paper, gotcha. But let's talk about the kind of the more wilder statements that are in these documents. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So what you're talking about earlier about the telexes and everything, that comes from Ramon J. Martinez's United States Customs Report. Is where that part comes from. So during his investigation, when the Customs and the Metropolitan Police Department, while the Tallahassee investigation was going on, they raided the 2 W Street apartments in D.C. and the warehouse that the finders had owned. And in raiding both of those places, they found, very different, things that, again, wasn't really corroborated on anything else outside of Ramon J. Martinez's report, because the evidence disappeared, is what the reports claimed, and it was just not able to be found. Wow. Even when they reopened the case in 1993, they went to go look for the evidence, and the evidence wasn't there. So we only have to go on Ramon J. Martinez, who I believe is credible through everything that I've looked. I've talked to his boss, John Sullivan, who went on the record to say that Ramon J. Martinez was the exemplary employee, and he known him to be 100% credible and truthful while he was working for him during the Finders case, because John Sullivan was the head of the United States Customs Child Pornography Unit during the late 80s. So yes, I mean they found exactly what you had mentioned there. So at the apartments, they found a finders member, Stuart Miles Silverstone, that was like in a whole computer in a room that had a whole bunch of computers, printers, and numerous documents. The documents supposedly contained instructions of attaining children for unknown purposes. And contained information on pregnation of female members of the finders, purchasing children, trading children, and kidnapping. There are telex messages using MCI account numbers between a computer terminal believed to be located in Silverstone's room in the W apartments and other terminals across different unknown places around the world. One telex ordered the purchase of 2 children in Hong Kong to be arranged from a contact in the Chinese embassy in Hong Kong. Another telex talked about the need for quote-unquote bank secrecy. Other documents are related to high-tech transfers to the United Kingdom, numerous property information on terrorism, explosives, and evasion of law enforcement. Wow. So that's what they found within the apartment. Of course, I played an interview with Michael Hollowell, former Finders Cult members, who he claims that the impregnation was just them talking about what members of the Finders, like the women, hey, I want to get pregnant by this member. I want to have a child by this member. That's what they meant by that. It's because of our Christian proclivities, and our conservative proclivities that he talked many times in the interview, William, that, of course, we just got those things wrong. That's all that was just, them saying, hey, I want this Finders member to be a husband to my children and not impregnation methods.
Yeah, I mean, but that's kind of their excuses the whole time. I mean, if you go back and look at the original documents, or the original arrest that happened in 1987, it's super sketchy. And I don't remember that reading it from the other documents that I had read, but like the guys who got arrested went into like a comatose state. They said they were lying on their back, staring up and not saying anything. Like, I'm not saying that that's something you could prosecute and make somebody guilty for, but it sure as heck makes them look guilty. And the kids, I don't remember reading that the kids like urinated and defecated on the ground. So it just it became more palpable when I was reading these newer FBI drops.
And that comes from the Tallahassee Police Department documents, which I have a redacted copy. They redacted it to hell in the FBI documents because the Tallahassee Police Department were so mad. They were so mad that they got railroaded in this investigation. They just released everything without redacting it.
Wow, yeah. So
they were just screw it.
Do you recollect in the newer documents? I have one in my notes, which is the DC MPD investigative file report for April 13th, 1987, where Yeah, okay, and there was like 21 people interviewed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Those were Finder members that were interviewed by Metropolitan Police Department Detective Jim Bradley and possibly Sergeant John Stitcher. And the FBI interviewed them as well. They were members of the Finders and family members of the Finders cult. We have no idea of those interviews. They have been released. So I wish they were, but we don't have them.
But there were notes. I mean, in my notes they said that the Finders started in the 60s, disenchanted with the quasi-military control of the group. They feared retribution. A building was burned down. They were infiltrated. The kids were brainwashed. Prevented contact with family, which is a standard cult behavior. And there was explicit letters of sexual activity in cages in Culpeper, Virginia, is what my notes say.
There were cages in Culpeper, Virginia. That was marked in the Virginia State investigation with someone on MuckRock tried to get the Freedom of Information Act, tried to get the Virginia State Police's reports on the Finders, but they don't have them anymore. They claim they don't have them. They're gone. Right. But yes, it was eyewitnesses revealed that there were cages that were used to keep children during the visits to the farm, which was known as the Free State, an area in the farm area that the Finders had owned near Culpeper, Virginia, near Nethers, Virginia, same area. But yes, that is in there. Now, there is much talk within the Tallahassee Police Department documents and the new documents that got released in these that when you left the cult that, there would be retaliated against. I'm not going to read the gung-ho traitor's letter to Ammerman's family that was sent, that Ammerman's brother, I think his name is David Ammerman, had shown them because, it's very explicit. But just imagine, your mother getting a letter about how well endowed your son is and how he pleasures females and stuff.
They called him a stud or something?
Yes.
Oh, man.
So, I mean, and again, with this whole thing, William, with the 6 children, that were all, and from what we know, we don't have any DNA testing of the children, but we do know through birth certificates and likenesses and testimony on record and the FBI investigation, where you trust the FBI or not. I don't, but I do trust the Tallahassee Police Department. Some people in the Tallahassee Police Department, but it does appear that those 6 children were members of their had parents that were in the Finders cult, and at the bare minimum, they definitely were neglected. And in my opinion, they were also mentally abused. The information about physical abuse, it's not as concrete as it is in McMartin, where there's tons and tons of medical evidence that many people want to take a blind eye. That Rossi Chet wrote in the Witch Hunt narrative book. There's definitely enough medical evidence that Raymond Bucky allegedly at least molested 6 children.
And that's how it started, was a third party, and McMartin was somebody was taken to a doctor, and the doctor confirmed it. So yes. That's like a third party from a professional saying that this person was molested, I think even like within the last 24 hours is what he was saying. Like
and it happened in multiple cases before it, believe the children started or before it came in the news, Yeah. So they come with mass hysteria that people were making stuff up, where these, there's at least 3 or 4 children that were, looked at before that happened. So in the Finders case, the medical evidence is kind of sketchy. It's not as concrete of whether or not, like Jordan Messina Arco had a partial hymen breakage that they claimed due to digital penetration, but there's not. I can't read the medical reports; they don't exist. And Max Livingston had lack of anal sphincter control, but that could have been just because the kids had a very, very poor diet. They ate veganism. They are. I said people are vegans. I'm not saying like that, but they're pretty much fruitarians. They didn't eat. And not only that, were they fruitarians? They only ate. They were giving food as reward. Right. They were having regular meal times.
Right. It was calorie control too, but it's another form of cult manipulation. Is restricting caloric intake. At certain times, making somebody eat out of somebody else's hands. That's actually another comment.
You might find this very interesting, William. It's something I want to mention. So there was a doctor called Dr. Diamond Greenberg. Okay, so Dr. Diamond Greenberg, he was a psychologist from the National Institute of Mental Health grant in 1971. He helped founded Causes, Child Abuse Unit for Studies, Educations, and Services in the University of Illinois. Well, Dr. Diamond Greenberg, was involved in 3 cases that are known as the quote-unquote satanic panic. One, Dr. Diamond Greenberg was a lead expert for the defense in the McMartin preschool trial to cast shade on one Key McFarland. Of course, you were aware. You know who Key McFarland was. She was the main therapist that was trying to get the statements from the children for the police in Manhattan Beach. But yes, so he was involved in that. He was involved in the Jewish Community Center case as well, saying that nothing happened there too. And he was actually called into the Finders case too as well by Kohler, which was head of the HRS Health Services in Florida. And in there he goes, no abuse. And yeah, maybe they were kind of neglected, but they meant well.
Right. So these guys he's probably a CIA operative, sent in at certain times to cover things up. Some of these doctors.
Well, he's covered up at least 3 of them. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't know. Tell me about the Jewish Community Center. I'm not aware of that case.
Okay, so JCC happened in a preschool in Chicago, and it was Beth Vargo who eventually joined Believe the Children. She thought ritual child abuse was going on, and she suspected that her 4-year-old daughter had been sexually abused at the JCC. Gotcha.
And so did that uncover a whole string of abuses?
Yes, and that's actually mentioned in Rossi Chet's Witch Hunt narrative, that there were enough evidence to show in court documents that there was, at the bare minimum, molestation that was going on at the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, and at the grand maximum, it was ritual abuse.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, so Ross Chait, Cheit, the Witch Hunt narrative. Ross Chait is a professor at Brown. He's a first-rate academic, and he's kind of a victim himself. He was involved in the boys' choir scandal in San Francisco, where these young men were getting raped all the time. He was one of the victims. So
yes,
he's unfortunately had some experience with cover-ups and all that other awful stuff. So, But there was something I was reading in my notes. There was something like they put on. I mean, there's definitely elements of ritual abuse, monster noises in black clothes, basement with the lights off, the slaughtered goats. There were 2 goats that they admitted they slaughtered, but their rationale made it sound believable that they were trying to use them for meat. And these weird names: Paradise is the place where they play, the game caller. I mean, there's a lot of very disturbing elements to this case.
Very much so, cultish elements, and cultish and occultish elements, and so as far as so do you want to start with the goat, what they call Goat Gate, which was the execution of Henrietta and Igor?
Yes, please.
Okay, so even Michael Hollowell also mentions this in his interview and talks about it. And Toby Terrell writes about it in his book, The Game Caller. Of course, they try to say it as an act of animal husbandry, but I'm going to read you some notes from it and, let you decide, William, and let your audience decide whether or not that they think this is animal husbandry, or was this a little bit something more than that going on, which I believe it was a little bit more than animal husbandry. So with the execution of Henrietta and Igor, there were 2 goats, and now they claim that it happened right before Tallahassee, okay? And so they claimed that they had to kill the goats earlier back in 1986 because winter was coming and they didn't have enough food on the farm to feed the goats, and that they were going to die because of the winter, okay?
Okay.
So, okay. So they put on robes, and now they claim the robes were to protect their clothes. They were actually just sheets. And so Ramon J. Martinez found this book in a W house. Oh no, it was in the warehouse. It was like a photo book, okay? And it was titled "The Execution of Henrietta and Igor," which was their goats. And so the photos showed execution of the goats, the disembowelment of the goats, skinning of the goats, and dismemberments at the hands of the children. So both the adults and the children were butchering these goats, okay? They removed the male testes of the goat in front of the kids. They opened up the goat's womb and noticed that there were baby goat fetuses inside and showed them to the children. And as well as there was a presentation of the goat's severed head to one of the children. All just fun and games, right?
Yeah,
all animal husbandry.
Incredible.
Just, see where the meat comes from. And Toby Terrell talks about in his book that the kids didn't even get to eat that meat. It was Petty and all the rest of the finders that ate all the meat. And then, Hallowell talks about in his interview, well, it was just us showing the animal husbandry and, but the kids didn't eat meat.
Good point. Excellent point. So they're fruitarians, watching the blood slaughter and goat head stuff. I mean, you're in true detective territory.
And some kids that are as young as 2 and 3 years old.
That's incredible. Yeah, so definitely ritual, some type of ritual cult abuse. I mean, that's got to be traumatizing as heck for a kid. Probably seeing the goat play around for a while, and then all of a sudden, guys, we're going to go down to the basement.
Now, all the mothers, according to Tallahassee Police Department Officer Rick Huffman, when he interviewed them, said they all thought it was a hands-on experience. One of the mother was not sure that the slaughter was necessary or that she approved, but she stated there were 3 men present at the time, and one of them being one of the men who were arrested, Ammerman, Douglas Ammerman. Hollowell had mentioned that he was there. And Stanley Burns, another finders member who was also down there in Tallahassee, because there's 2 vans. There was 2 vans, and there was only 6 kids that we know of. But the other finders van had other finders member, Toby Terrell, Stanley Burns, among others. But yeah, so they claim the mothers all were pretty much they just wore sheets and there was no ritual going on. It was just a learning experience for their children. Yeah,
it's incredible. No, that's just for public consumption. I don't believe that at all. But wasn't there something like close to where they were, the Jensen Beach? Weren't they associated with an elementary school as well?
No.
Okay.
That was in the investigation in '93 when they were investigating Glendale through Mr. Clements, and apparently something with Jensen Beach was going on too, ritual related, but I've never found any documentation of that. Gotcha. And when I asked Clements, he was like, yeah, Jensen Beach is a weird area, but the school's pretty sound from what he can remember. So I don't know. It's just weird that they were investigating that at the same time they were investigating Glendale when they reopened the case in '93. Now, I will say this. The kids were taken to a Montessori school in Newbury, Kentucky. and the adults were there to rebuild this retirement community called New Hope with Reverend Jim Weicker. Okay.
Okay.
So Skip Clements says that these kids, and among other kids who are part of the finders, were taken to many Montessori schools across the country. Now, whether that was because I do believe that the Montessori schools, majority of them at that time, just like a lot of the preschools, ritual abuse was going on, and majority of a lot of them, just like it happened in Glendale, the Glendale Montessori school case. So that's a connection that Skip Clements talked about it as a researcher who he was investigator for both the finders after the fact and the reopening of the case. And during the Stewart case, which happened in June and July 1987. But yeah, that was him just saying, there's a connection that way, and that the kids may have been going to these different Montessori schools where there was, blackmail, ritual abuse, and everything going on.
Gotcha. And on that subject, I mean, one of the interesting aspects of this Finder's Drop is that there were 2 pages about the McMartin preschool, but there really was no reference in the other documents to these 2 pages. Can you talk about what those remarkable findings were as far as the McMartin?
Yes. So these documents too, if anybody's out there, it wasn't just released in these new FBI vault release. It was also in the previous Freedom of Information Act released by one Ali Conti.
Okay.
So I'd seen these documents before. So these documents were nothing new. They were now they were in the exact same position they were released in the last FBI document, Freedom of Information Act by Conti. So you can go look those up, and they're in the exact same places they are in here. Now, I have no idea why these documents are just here. That the FBI, official was looking this up while he was doing a LexisNexis search, and is it just there? Is it just I have no idea. But yeah, I mean, it's in between a 1993 letter of in January 25th, 1993 letter of the Lewis bill from Democratic Florida Congressman Tom Lewis to reopen the United States Customs Department Child and Pornography and Protection Unit. Okay, to try to get that reopened. Mm-hmm. And then on the other end of it is a letter from the Department of Treasury, U.S. Customs Service, about them trying to reopen that too as well. So I don't know why it's there. Your guess is as good as mine. It's kind of out of place. But yes, so the second document, because the first document I talk about is a map. Okay, that map, to my knowledge, has never been seen. If anybody's ever seen this in any of Ted Gunderson's documents, let me know. Because I've never seen that map before ever. And also, we were talking about it off air, William, it corroborates, Ed Opperman had a gentleman, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, sir. You're very, very nice geologist to be interviewed by Ed.
It's like Slater or something. I talked to him as well. I reached out to him.
The map confirms that there was a tunnel entrance hidden by the street from a garage. This map confirms his findings. That's in this document, okay? Now it does say at the bottom, diagram of McMartin has been demolished. Gunderson says 2 tunnels have once been connected. Who are they talking about? Because Gunderson wouldn't wrote that in a report, So who is this report for? Is it for the FBI? Is Ed Opperman's and George's from CabDev.org and my questions of Gunderson, is it a possibility to see that Gunderson was always an FBI agent till his death? I don't know. But again, this raises another question about that. Because this map was not from Gunderson, anything Gunderson's done. This map is from someone, talking about Gunderson. So, and in the preliminary report after that, I do believe this is at one time was released by Gunderson. So I don't know, William. I mean, there are some people out there, some researchers, I don't know how you feel about Ted, but there are some researchers, including myself, who believe that Ted Gunderson, he was a counter-intel pro agent before he started doing everything as far as raising awareness like McMartin and the finders and everything. I'm not saying Gunderson didn't do good work. I'm just concerned that he was always once a counter-intel pro agent, always a counter-intel pro agent.
But he inserted himself into the McMartin case. I think at one point he was dating or in a romantic relationship with I think maybe it was Magali or somebody.
It was Jackie Magali,
Jackie Magali, yeah. Who when I was working for Ed in much more vigorous sense, I reached out and talked to her. So she's still around, but she does not want to talk at all. But so what's he doing? Like, that's a real breach of objective protocols to just, living at somebody's house. I think he was really involved. So what's he do? I mean, it seems very strange for somebody who's working on the case to also really get in that deep with somebody was the primary complainant, in my understanding, or what the other girl was. She passed away due to alcohol poisoning. I forgot her name, but
I know you're talking about the woman.
Yes,
whose child was molested at McMartin. I can't remember her name offhand.
Yeah. So, but these tunnels are very remarkable. But there's also information on the tunnel. They found a Disney bag from 1982, which indicates that it was recent. Somebody was recently in there. It wasn't like some tunnel that was. Well, let's see. So if it's 1990, when was this thing done? It's fairly, I mean, just the fact that there's a Disney bag means that it's been used, right? So,
yes. And one thing I want you to know, in the finder's chronology, the Washington Metropolitan Police Department were trying to get the marked secret tunnel maps under D.C. They were trying to get those, but of course, you need a certain clearance, and they were unable to get those. But the woman, the mother, was the first mother who came. Her name was Judy Johnson. Judy Johnson,
thank you. Yeah. And she was discredited. They called her a drunk, but she really didn't start drinking heavily until after the whole thing started. So
yes, from the guilt.
Right, just everything, just the pressure, stress, the intensity, and so it's unfortunate. But this document is really remarkable because there's other information. There's the Disney bag. There's a 9-foot wide chamber in the tunnel, so it's not merely a tunnel system. There's actually a room underneath there, which confirmed some of the statements by the children. And then they found a plate with 3 pentagrams drawn by an adult. I mean, but it's just really a preschool report. It's not merely a tunnel report because they found one of the doors had a deadbolt lock only from the inside. Some of the rooms had no doorknobs. They reported that each classroom had an on and off light switch labeled fire alarm that did not connect to any fire alarm system. So...
it's just like in the Glendale case where the bathroom had no had locks that were only like deadbolt locks that were at the top, and it could only be closed from one way. So why would a bathroom be like that? It's very weird.
Right. So only kids wouldn't be able to deadbolt it.
Yeah, or that it only locked in from it only like this classroom. There was no doorknobs. There were just the deadbolt locks to a bathroom. It's really weird.
What are 100 animal bones doing underneath there too? Like that's a very strange thing for a preschool to have under in that tunnel, right? 2,000 artifacts not listed, but they found 2,000 artifacts unlisted, which is unfortunate.
Yes, very much so. And all the satanic panic narrative pushers all just say, "Well, William, it was just a trash dump. It's a trash dump."
Right, there's an excuse. Right, so there's a trash dump underneath a preschool that kids have talked about there being tunnels. It's incredible. They always have a rationale for something, just like the finders, really.
Yes, very much so.
So the other thing is you've done some research in this article that was in the FBI drop from the Washington Free Weekly City Paper. It was titled "In Search of the Finders." I think the guy's name was like Rob Cohen was the author.
John Cohen.
John Cohen. But it was a very detailed article and really had pictures of Petty, who doesn't seem to has successfully kind of kept himself out of getting photographed. But can you talk about what was interesting in that article, please?
Oh yeah, very much so. So John Cohen's article it's written about almost a year afterwards, and it gives us a pretty idea of what was going on at the time, and it talks much about the officers that were there that were originally in the Tallahassee Police Department arrest, which was Tony Mashburn and Judy Sioki, and how they stand by, Sioki, should I say, and how they stand by that they made those arrests, that they believe that the children, were not properly cared for. They didn't balk, because the case was dropped. And I talked to the district attorney in the Tallahassee area, Willie Meggs, and there wasn't much he could remember because it was so long ago. And he was a very, very nice man who they defamed and said, "Oh, William," even at the time, it was in this article, Meggs he's got a gun on his hip and a Bible in his hand. He's just some Christian conservative. He doesn't understand these crazy, wacky ways of these cults and how the finders raise their children.
Right.
So, he stands by. He said, look, they were, he really felt bad for the children, and he was like, definitely some shady things were going on, So
Right.
the officers stand by it. Tallahassee Police Department spokesman Scott Hunt is a spokesman from the department, also stands by it. The two officers that really went on record, even Cheryl Wigand, who was like the sex crimes investigator, even her, she was like, this stuff's, the finders were weird,
Right.
And the only officers that casted shade were Lieutenant Van Meter and what's his name? There's so many names I'm trying to keep track of.
Well, it's kind of a saga because now we have these documents, but it's hard to put the pieces together of an important case that happened, 1987, right?
Yes. Rick Huffman, that's Detective Rick Huffman, who took over for Wigand after Wigand went on vacation. As weird as she had a planned vacation during a major case, But so Huffman takes over, and Huffman, says some weird things. I want to read this to you, okay? Huffman was particularly rankled about allegations of sexual abuse. I told them, you people are dealing with fire. For you to mention possible sexual battery to the media, they don't hear possible. You're proposing the idea. This is where the inexperience hurt them. They should have personally gone to the doctor and had a good AT to find out how far we're going to go with this. If the doctor said he had semen stains on the girl, they should have asked, well, where did you find? A little? A lot? Where did you find it? Was it inside the vagina, or was it different than that on the foot? I just think we jump to conclusions. Isn't that really weird for a police officer to frame it in that type of language?
Yes. Yeah, very strange. It just adds to the strangeness of the whole case. Like, the whole thing is just bizarre. And they had all kinds of shell companies and front companies, and the finders were associated with the Global Press Review. So, and there was a summary. I can't remember which document it was, but the quote is, "It is the writer's belief that the Finders Organization is and has been utilized by the Central Intelligence Agency as a disinformation service spreading non-essential, non-critical information to various organizations throughout the United States and overseas."
And that would be Detective Jim Bradley in his report. Now, Jim Bradley, I don't believe 100% understood or grasped everything that was going on. Compared to Sergeant John Stitcher, John Stitcher died on the table. He had a heart attack and died during open heart surgery in the early 90s. But Stitcher definitely, Toby Terrell talks about Stitcher in his book about so there was an FBI agent. Her name was Athenia Veronius, and she was who they based Clarice Starling on in The Silence of the Lambs. Okay? And allegedly, Athenia Veronius was the fixer. Okay, so she tells Toby Terrell in his book, The Game Caller, and I'm going to talk to Athenia to see if I can get her side of the story. Toby Terrell says that before everything, she meets with him downstairs at the Future Enterprises office. Of course, Future Enterprises was the computer agency where they were training CIA members that the Finders worked at, that Toby Terrell worked at, for example. So he claims that she said, we're going to put a lid on this thing. Put a lid on what? Before an investigation? Like, well, what? Okay. So she was the one that she claims that she didn't see anything. She claims that Ramon J. Martinez, allegedly from what I've read, he just made all of these claims. He falsified the customs report to kind of get himself up, to move himself up in rank in the customs. So he made all this stuff up just for advancement. So Veronius is definitely my fixer. She actually runs a paranormal investigations unit now in Greensboro, North Carolina, near me, William.
Interesting. Greensboro keeps popping up. Yeah.
There's this one last thing. She went to work with NECMEC too in the 90s. So
NECMEC. Interesting. Wow. Yeah, it's an interesting web of associations. There's a couple of FBI guys who are out there in the paranormal field. One of whom I talked to, John D'Souza, who actually had some interesting ideas about the smiley face killers. So anyway, we're at about 45 minutes, John. Is there anything that you'd like to add, or anything that we didn't cover that just to kind of put a bookend on this?
Yes, William. Okay, so in John Stitcher's report, I'm going to read a little bit of that. He different from Bradley, and that Bradley was kind of like you mentioned earlier. yeah, the kids were probably brainwashed, but the definers are just, we kind of like downplayed everything, okay? Where Stitcher was like, yeah, there's some things going on, all right? So, so at approximately 15:30 hours on February 18th, 1987, Detective Jim Bradley spoke with Special Agent Blank, reference any contact the members of the finders have had with the agency. Special Agent Blank was guarded but frank on his responses. He confirmed that, okay, this is, him talking to a special agent within either the FBI or the CIA. He confirmed that Isabel Petty, now deceased, was an employee of the agency, the CIA, from 1950 until 1971. When asked if our investigation, which is the Metropolitan Police Department investigation, was treading on anyone's toes out there, Blank replied, sort of. He acknowledged that they had somewhat working on the case since it first broke on the news media. He also stated that the agency is aware that during the period of 1969 to 1971, Blank traveled to Moscow, North Korea, and South Vietnam. Okay, so that reconfirms that the unredacted finder's chronology that I was talking about earlier.
Gotcha.
So again, they were stepping on their toes with their information. So here's another part. They did not. Okay, so this person apparently they had a person in the MPD had a source that got hold of some disk of some information. Blake did not know that the person he turned the information onto in Europe was a source of this office, and is not aware that the source brought the disk back to this office. Blake actually transferred the disk in London. Detective Bradley then turned the disk over to WFEO FBI Counterintelligence Office for analyzation. We have not been apprised of the results of that analysis, nor do we expect to be. Regardless of what type of operation that may be advised, scratched off, engaged in, there will be no justification for the way the children have been treated, and the matter will be addressed in Family Division Superior Court.
Interesting.
So Stitcher was final in saying this is messed up.
Right.
He was adamant.
So on the record too, wrote about it.
Yes.
You're right. So that's, yeah. I mean, these are kind of like little battles that take place in these huge bureaucratic organizations. People are going to cover ups. Some people are angry. Some people have to quit the FBI. The long-term guys at the FBI have probably been involved in all kinds of shady business, which is sad. But one quick question before we end is MuckRock. Are they in the job of just doing FOIA requests? Do you know?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they are.
Because I think I saw. Did they recently do a FOIA request about Epstein and obtain information? Because I saw a recent document, very fascinating, regarding the Epstein case, where it showed their most recent investigations in 2019 that led up to his arrest in July. Are you familiar with anything like that?
So MuckRock, what happens is MuckRock is kind of like just like a intermediary.
Mm-hmm.
So MuckRock, it takes investigative journalists like you and myself. We go to MuckRock and they have templates that we can use, and we pay money to send our Freedom of Information Act requests to these agencies or local law enforcement at behest through MuckRock as like their journal, like saying like using their letterhead and everything like that. Mm-hmm. So it gives us legitimacy.
Gotcha, I didn't know.
And that's how MuckRock works.
Are you familiar with a MuckRock FOIA request on Epstein within 2019, a recent one?
I haven't read it yet.
Okay, because it's interesting because it shows that they were looking into him at the beginning of the year. So, yeah, it's pretty remarkable. It wasn't that arrest that happened in July. There was groundwork taking place where they were taking a look at him at Teterboro, I think in January or February. So pretty fascinating stuff. Yeah, very interesting. So anyway, John Brisson, we've read the documents on the Finders case. Tons more information. When can we expect to read your book?
Hopefully sometime next year, William. One last thing I want to mention is, do you remember the famous Israeli spy Jonathan Pollard?
Of course, yeah.
He was mentioned in the FBI documents. Now we have no idea why at the very end that they were researching him, or that maybe that he was a witness or something to do with the Finders or something back in 1987. But he is in the document toward the very end. It does mention Jonathan J. Pollard, and I want to shout out to George from cavdev.org. He was who brought that to my attention.
Interesting. I wonder why Pollard was brought up in that. What was Pollard doing? Before he got busted as a spy for Israel? Do you know what office he was in? Was he in the FBI?
I think he was a former intelligence analyst, wasn't he?
I think so. I don't know that case very well, unfortunately. But it still gets brought up. I think Netanyahu was asking for Jonathan Pollard's release.
I don't know why they looked into Pollard at 1987, or whether or not he gave an interview about Petty or whatever, or why it was in there, but it's in there.
Yeah, he was an intelligence analyst for the United States. Top secret classified information to Israel. Violated the Espionage Act. Wow, interesting.
So I found that really weird. I just want to
That
get
is
that out
weird.
there.
That's weird.
And I glossed over many times reading this until George showed it to me, and I was like, wow, actually, that's weird. Okay. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's.
So
I wish we knew.
You're on social media, so people can reach out if they have any questions or anything. Facebook, Twitter, is that correct?
No face. Well, I have a Facebook group. Yes, we've read the documents. I have a Twitter. We've space read. And you could also email me. We've read the documents at protonmail.com.
Gotcha. Jonathan or John Brisson, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, William.
All right, cool.
Take care.